Today is the third day of the February 86 7-day retreat. Yesterday we dealt mostly with a question about what is the meaning of this work and of this life. And I don't remember ever having gotten back to what is the meaning of life. Other than telling how much this question had occupied me and myself. Through all the chaos and meaninglessness surrounding life in a war and post-war and pre-war. And actually, a question such as this, what is the meaning of life? Or, as this person also put it, why am I born into this? What is the meaning of being born and then just dying? Are these ordinary questions which need to be answered instantly? Or can they be answered in any conventional way? Conventional including going to the books. Written by philosophers and theologians. Or what has been written down about the sayings of enlightened teachers or sages. Can anyone answer this question for oneself? What is the state of mind in which such a question arises? Obviously, in my case, it was a state of fear, anxiety. Reflection on what was going on and anticipation of what may very likely go on in the future. And there was a feeling of total separation from the events that surrounded me. So is one asking such a question out of a state of isolation? Isolated in one's fears and concerns for one's own survival and well-being. Maybe it includes the survival and well-being of others. But there's fear, a fear of not surviving. and the tremendous desire to continue. In a better way. I think as long as the mind asks questions out of isolation and separation and fear, fear which itself comes from remembrances of past events, and it comes out of anticipating similar events in the future. As long as this is the state of the mind, there isn't any possible answer to this question. It may even be absurd to ask it, because life is seen as something separate from oneself. The question makes it that way. Here am I in my misery. Of course, if one says, well, it's the meaning of my personal life. Yes, there's separation too, between the asker and what is there. But when we ask this question very generally, what is the purpose of life? Why are we here? And beyond us human beings, why is everything there? Why do the trees break into leaves and blossoms in the spring? And then bear fruit and lose their leaves in the winter. What's the meaning of all that? In the midst of this chaos that we human beings have created on this earth, how can one answer this question? As long as there is this feeling of separation from the chaos in the world and from all the events in nature. If on some occasion during a retreat or at any time one walks down the road quietly, not that the footsteps are quiet, they were noisy these days. One didn't walk right on the sanded part but on the side, breaking through these layers of iced snow. It was an incredible racket. And yet walking quietly, not objecting, not wanting, just this openness of listening and being with no expectation whatsoever. Climbing over the little snow wall that's created by the plow along the creek side. The sound of the stream. A few days there was almost no sound. Just a little gurgling under the ice. And the huge hemlocks. Snow on the little branchlets, a few chickadees flying upside down and downside up, calling quietly. And maybe at a moment this pale winter sun behind the clouds and yet casting some light through the trees. The incredible beauty of all of that. And the joy of it. Which can be expressed but need not be expressed at all. At such a moment, where is that question about the meaning of life? That part of the mind is still, and that's why the other is there. That part of the mind that wants to figure out and that wants to have answers and wants to calm itself down, overcome its anxieties, live happily forever after. It's just not there. It's quiet, and therefore there's this space and quietness inside and out. There's no division there. No feeling of separation or isolation at all, because there's no one there to be isolated. A deer maybe jumping away. It's doing just that. It's not afraid. I don't know what it is. If at such a moment a thought comes up, what thoughts do come up? Can this last, or will I have this kind of joy tomorrow or forever? Or then one can just notice how there's just a shrinkage taking place. And back in the narrow channel of my past and my future, my pleasures, my pains. And in that channel lives the question, what is the meaning of life? You could say, now wait a minute, what you're describing there, the frozen creek and the gurgling water and the trees and the sun and the deer and the chickadees. To be at one with that is no problem. And silly, I didn't say being at one with it. I think that's a false term, not a good word, expression, because who is at one with what? This is not a process of fusion, the self fusing with the landscape. There's no self, no sense of self, and therefore no being at one. But coming back to the objection raised, and one may continue saying, what about the scene in Afghanistan? Iran and Iraq, we can't even begin to list. We would spend the rest of the time here for the talk listing the present sites of human brutality to human beings. How does one see that? What's the meaning of that? Is it possible to see that in the same way as the peaceful, sloping forest path? Seeing it out of a depth of understanding of how thought creates division, thought that can be observed in oneself, creating shrinkage, division, anxiety, fear, the need for defense. And the anger and violence which is bred through fear or through remembrance of violence endured by oneself. Therefore the craving for revenge, the wanting to conquer or to have power over oneself and others. The security in having allies, the added power in that. All of this is observable in this human mind as it manifests in one human being. And out of this stuff, out of this mind stuff, this thought stuff, wars are made. And suffering ensues. So can what is happening so-called out there in the world be seen not with anger, not with resignation, not with immediately the desire to do something about it without even understanding what it is all about? Our desire for answers pushes us compulsively into action which doesn't come out of any kind of depth of understanding. Just recently on the news there was a brief scene of some rebel leader from a country visiting the White House. Never heard of this person, and all the people who were watching the news never had either. Asking for arms and being assured that he would get so and so many millions worth of arms because he's fighting communism. Actually later, reading or hearing about it, he himself very recently was a communist himself. I don't know whether that was known to the White House, probably not. There's this obsession with images of people and how to take care of these people. The people who have to be eradicated and the people who have to be saved. It's a very primitive way of thinking, but it takes place in the 20th century. in highly civilized countries, not just among the so-called barbarians. In Germany, the solution was to eliminate the Jews and some others alongside with them. The subhumans of the eastern countries, these were called subhumans. And imagery was created of them in our school books and newspapers. Very often not photographs, but cartoons. People from the east, from Poland and Russia, were called the swamp people. And to eliminate them was to create peace for the super race. This happens in civilized countries and in so-called uncivilized countries. Everywhere human beings think in these categories, in these images, to make themselves secure. And we have these games now, these video games. The more eliminated, the greater the victory of these little bleeps. So we were asking, is it possible to look at the world, namely at us human beings, not with anger, feelings of revenge or resignation, or urges to retaliate, or urges to solve something before understanding what is actually happening. Look at it without any feeling of separation. Oneself as one observes or has observed oneself. Having all these mechanics of thought right there built into the brain. So that one can really see the sorrow that we create ourselves, for ourselves and for others. Feel it. Not shield ourselves from it. Be in touch with it. Beyond the level of my personal problems and aches and pains. Sorrow is not something personal. It becomes personal when we feel sorry for ourselves and then we feel so enclosed. But when one sees that and drops that self-pity, which is such a trap, then the commonness of it is so clear. And then maybe the response will be compassion. Not premeditated or learned or intended compassion. But compassion that comes out of seeing human sorrow and the ignorance of it. The ignorance of how we create it, and therefore the ignorance of how it can come to an end. under constant barrage of propaganda in every locality. Children not being free to learn to think for themselves, but being indoctrinated from the outset. To love the flag and hate the enemy. Not just hate, but dread him. There was another question which was asked. And that was in connection with a statement that was made yesterday. That the pursuit of pleasure is always linked up with pain. I don't know whether this is how it was put, but we can start it over. It was not pronounced as a law. And can one abstain from taking it as such, but observe in oneself, or question oneself whether it is indeed so that pursuing pleasure is connected with fear and pain. The pursuit may already arise out of a feeling of painful lack, emptiness, boredom, hoping to fill that or assuage it, ignore it or get away from it through pleasure, which it does not. It doesn't go away. It stays, albeit covered over with pleasurable experiences, but the fear that these pleasurable experiences may not last is always there. Even at times in the pleasure there is pain. Of potential possible loss. But I didn't finish yet with what this person said. Just wanted to make clear that this statement had not been a statement of a truth. It is always open to questioning. And unless one understands this intimately, directly for oneself, it is no use just gathering statements of, so-called statements of truth. All life is sorrow. One can say that endlessly and not understand what it means. In oneself, who is all human beings. The person continued saying, do I have to give up all of my pleasures? all my pleasures. I don't know why he said all of my pleasures. Another person said, I'm afraid with this whole thing of no self, if there was no self, I'm afraid what that would be like. The fear being, I may lose all my freedoms to do what I choose. My freedom to choose to do what I like. Again, with every question that comes up, can one question immediately, if this is possible, or maybe so involved and entangled in the question that all the fears seem so real that there's no possibility even of questioning it. What? Particularly in a retreat, with all the quietness around and an occasional talk, maybe one will question. Why am I asking this? Where is this question coming from? If all pleasure is linked with pain and fear, do I have to give it up? Why this question, do I have to give it up? Is this because I want something better than pain linked with pleasure? Is it that I'm missing something? If I gave up my pleasures, which are linked with pain, then could I be into something more secure? I think we'll leave the question with a choice for a separate treatment. Of course, this idea of having to give up one's pleasures is an ancient one. To have to give up desire is built into most religious, contemplative systems. To give up one's possessions, to have vow of chastity. From one or two vows to, in one sect of Zen Buddhism, 270, and then some odd vows. Including anything that may be pleasurable. I wonder whether 271 covers it. One can already see that this is again a mind product, a thought product. This giving up of pleasures. A sort of a logical progression of pleasure leads to pain, or if pleasure needs energy, then to eliminate pain and to conserve energy, which is to be used for contemplating on the good life or God or enlightenment, then let's do away with it. let's set up a rule or a vow, which, as all products of thought, in reality doesn't turn out the way thought imagines it would turn out. Pleasure or desire cannot be forbidden. It can be forbidden, but it does not disappear from the scene. It just goes underground, into hiding. And then does its thing clandestinely, which produces guilt, which then is the problem of the church fathers, or how to deal with the guilt of the monks or the nuns. So there's an ancient tradition of having to give up desire, having to give up pleasure, in order to what? What is it that one wants? One just wants the supreme pleasure of enlightenment, attentiveness, awareness, clarity. So there's no difference. It's just a change of objects, a change of goals. The trouble, the real trouble starts when one wants both. I want to be attentive, but as in this meeting, as we looked at this, realized when there's desire, one doesn't want to be attentive. One wants to flow with the desire and the obtaining of the fruits of this desire. Desire being imagining what one wants. Maybe the quieter the retreat, the more vivid the imagination. And then all physical systems go. And that in itself is a pleasurable event. It arouses energy. One may have felt sagging before. And why interrupt that with attention? Who wants to do that? Because if in this flow of desire, and it may just, in a retreat, it may just be the imagination, although these days one can get in one's car and go. It's all right. But in this flow of energy towards something with all the titillation of the imagination, then to look at that is definitely an interruption of the flow. There's no question about it. To look at how this desire originates, where it comes from, how it manifests, the whole dynamics of it, to look at it, to question it, is a completely different use of energy. And the desire may melt, peter out, disappear. But is the attention there because one has wanted it to be there, because one has desired that too? No, I think at the moment of desiring something in one's mind, fantasizing and this stream we were talking about, stream of energy toward that goal, toward, well, we all know that. At that moment, there's just that. How come one wakes up for an instant and realizes that there is fantasizing going on? I don't know the answer to that, it just happens. For a moment there is attention of what's going on, just as one wakes up from a dream, maybe in the middle of the night. And I think all of us know this phenomenon. If the dream has been very lovely, pleasant, one may want to continue it. Or is at this moment that there is awareness, that awareness has broken in, dawned, you can use whatever word. At that moment, is there no choice but to look? Maybe one has understood time and time again the futility of fantasy, the hangover afterward, meaning the emptiness and feeling of lack is there, just as painful as it was before. The fears, this whole complex thing, maybe at the moment of awareness one sees that whole scene laid out like on a clear map. It's not an intention, it's there. And then there's no choice, no wanting to be attentive. It's just attention is there to look at what is actually going on, not escaping into fantasy. Being with this feeling of drainedness or shallowness, boredom, emptiness, lack, to wonder what that is actually, because one has never touched it. One has always escaped into pleasure or fantasy, entertainment, mental or physical. And it is not a vow that one is fulfilling. Vows are also escapes. Or, escape into some kind of a security, which it is not, because vows are just there to be broken. If one will look, because there's no choice, because one needs to understand, one doesn't have to vow. But if one vows, then there's the temptation to, or the rebellion against being strapped by something. Person used that word renunciation too. Do I have to renunciate pleasures? But renouncing anything, meaning deciding out of ideas that something is good, something is bad, something will lead to enlightenment, something else will not, out of all of these ideas to decide to renounce something, it doesn't work. It just imposes a new conditioning upon all the old ones that are already there. And a conditioned mind does not see. It only acts out of compulsion, mechanically. So does one really need to understand one's drivenness? Because one understands the conflicts, fears, sorrows that come out of it, as well as the fleeting pleasures. One really needs to understand it, awareness will be there. And the energy to look will also be there. Because one understands the diffusion of energy too. It is so clear. It has nothing to do with being moral. That's an idea, very arbitrary, relative idea, changing from one time to another, from one place to another. We will look at this other question too in this connection. The fear coming up at the thought of there being no self. Maybe not just the thought, maybe one has briefly touched that state. Particularly when walking up a hill or down the creek. Without wanting any results. But then thought tries to think the whole situation through and out. What would happen if I had no self? Would I then still have the freedom of choice? Meaning to choose what I want to do with my life. This freedom of choice, or freedom of will, free will, is such an ingrained concept that one rarely questions it. What freedom of will or freedom of choice really is. Whether it's really free. One may think briefly, well, I'm free to go here or to go there or to do this or buy that. But on what basis does one go here or there or buy this or do that? What is the basis of this felt or thought of freedom? Isn't it all of one's conditioned tastes and wants, maybe dating back into one's childhood? One grew up poor and now one wants a lot of money to feel safe. There's not the freedom to make money, but the drivenness to make it. Or the profession or job one chooses. How free is one? to really do what one likes? And does one even know what one likes? One may choose a profession, find one doesn't like it at all. And then how does one choose another one? Again, to just look at the process at work of choosing, trying to find what would be most in line with one's skills, one's satisfactions as one knows them from the past. So the past determining the choice. I think this whole feeling of freedom is totally interlinked with a feeling of self. The self thinks it's free. But itself is the origin of its wants. Its pains, its feelings of separation, loneliness are the force behind the choices. So they're not free. They're determined by what goes on in this self-structure, which we have gone into many times. Of course, even to attempt to imagine what it would be like if there was no self, it's just the operation of thought, and thought comes out of what one knows, and what one knows is self. It's rather futile to pursue such thoughts, but we do it, and then we're caught in the fears of it, and then we wonder how to get rid of those fears. Again, the self wanting a better state. Maybe it isn't at all a question of giving up, renouncing, getting rid of self or desires or pleasures, but it is solely a matter of seeing what's going on, perceiving it, letting it come into awareness. A seeing or an awareness which is not dominated by the self, which is free of the self. And therefore not owned by anyone. That's why we ask all the time when there's seeing something, when greed is seen, is there immediately the judge who says you shouldn't be greedy? Then it's not seeing, it's just the self commenting on itself, thinking about itself. Or maybe an instant of seeing immediately taken over by one's moral ideas. You shouldn't be this way, you should be otherwise. And there's no seeing in that. There's only moralizing and analyzing. can that be seen when it happens? Not be so caught up in the process. Not be caught up in any process, but be aware of the process that's going on this instant. It will happen. It does happen. If one is seriously questioning this whole way that we are living, on the tiny level and on the large global level. And there's an unquenchable yearning to come to clarity, which has nothing to do with desire. It has to do with the need to understand, so one doesn't put one's foot in it time and time again. Let the self and the desires, the pursuit of pleasure, let that be illumined with attention, and let attention take care of it. It does. Renunciation does not. It perpetuates the same game. And if at a moment of this flow of desire and going after it, there is not the slightest inclination to look, then why look? Why make a problem out of it? One will want to begin looking when one is in sadness again, in fear again, or disappointment. And it's not too late. Attention is not a matter of time. We will end here for today.